Hey Keith,
What's up?
how's your stress levels today?
Stressed about this episode. We're talking about stress and it stresses me out.
Yeah. Well,
Every time I hear the word stress, I realize I'm stressed. No, my stress levels are actually pretty low today
oh, okay.
in the moment. But as we talk about this, my stress levels will increase.
You should have like a real-time heart rate variability monitor.
Yeah, that would be fun.
Well, okay. So let's talk about it. Why don't we take it from the top with,
But why don't we talk about why are we talking about stress?
yeah, good idea.
Why are we talking about stress?
Well, it seems like the level of stress is going up for folks. I'm feeling stressed. I mean, for one thing, there's a big transition happening with a new governor, a new government. And that brings up a lot of questions.
Right. Yeah, the election and now a new government coming in. The change of government is always a stressful point for many people. So that's one piece. So there's more of like a larger existential stressor right now.
Yeah, there's that going on. And then there's also the threat of a widening war in the Middle East. I mean, that's on my mind.
Right, me too. Well, and just what's going on in the Middle East is actually very stressful. Oh, you've got the Ukraine, you've got war, so there's wars that are particularly stressful right now. There's inflation that has stressed a lot of people.
Yeah.
So there's a number of things happening that one could get stressed by.
Plenty of reasons right now. Yep.
Yeah. And today is about working with stress because stress is, well, let's talk about what is stress? What are we even talking about? Let's first define what we're talking about.
Well, this reminds me of conversations you and I have about the word trauma sometimes, where the conventional definition is like trauma is something that happens like an event, versus the way we like to talk about it is a pattern inside your body, a pattern in your nervous system.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm
process pattern. Yeah.
thinking about stress that way as a pattern, but obviously there are triggers of stress that are real, that we face, challenges that we face.
Yeah. So we're talking about the process in the body that really includes like a physiological and psychological reaction in your body, response in your body that includes certain things, right? That when we're in a stress response, it could be muscle tension, your breath rate might be a little different. You might have more adrenaline, right? You might be more irritable, more overwhelmed, more anxious. Your mind might be operating in a heightened state. That's what we're talking about stress from. Now some people might go, well, that's me all the time. Well, okay, maybe. But you got to work with that too, I guess. But I think that's not what we're referring to. We're not talking about a state that people live in their whole life. That's kind of a different thing, right? Is it?
I mean, I certainly can relate to people who feel that way, that they live in a chronic state of tension. And I can relate to that. My physiologic markers would support that in some ways as well. We can get into that later,
too.
but
well, yeah, I guess that's true. So you could have a baseline of stress. That I guess that's what you were saying here. You could actually have a baseline of stress and not have a baseline of what would be the opposite, relaxation. What would be the opposite?
Well, I think we need to talk about eustress, EU stress, which means like the kind of stress that helps you grow, the kind of stress that, if you don't stress a muscle by walking and using that muscle, then it's going to atrophy, right? So there's a certain sweet spot or window of tolerance where stress is critical to experience, to develop resilience, to stay strong, flexible, so on. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about a kind of chronic switched on, chronic in the sense that it's not in response to an acute threat in your environment.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So we're talking about a chronic heightened state of arousal on some level. Sometimes it can lead to a collapse of energy, but we're talking about the stress response being a kind of that chronic state of heightened arousal. And what you're sort of breaking out is the difference between like this positive stress, sometimes called eustress, versus maybe it's called distress, right? You're in distress, which is stress that feels not productive inside of you.
Yeah, exactly. The origins of these experiences have protective mechanisms in them, right? You experience a threat in your environment, you have a dump of stress hormones, you respond to the threat, and then the hormones get metabolized and you go back into a, relatively speaking, more calm, relaxed, open, creative state.
Yeah. So, okay. So, stress being this heightened psychological, physiological response. Generally, people know what that is. Many people feel stressed. Some people feel stressed all the time, right? Some people go through waves of it. I mean, on some level, even this stress is a natural part of life. But I think a part of our growth is just working with it to not stay stuck in stress. We want to do things and change behaviors so that we can regulate our system to come back to a more homeostatic set point that is one of, like you're saying, openness, relaxation, alertness, but calm.
Right. I'm curious, Keith, what you think. I mean, this is veering off into more of a philosophical kind of sociocultural domain with this question, but one of the things that I'm tracking is the gap between the haves and the have-nots in our culture is really broadening. And I'm kind of wondering about the stress of perceiving that the American dream, or the dream of owning your own home, or being able to retire and having enough money to, have a comfortable experience and so on. How much of that stress is happening, in the zeitgeist? It seems strong to me, but I don't know if that's just my perception.
How much stress are people feeling like they are under-resourced? Is that the question?
Like you're not going to be able to get where you want to get to in your life, like to have the security or the being comfortable enough, or having the resources to, buy your groceries, have a roof over your head, not be stressed in that way.
Well, if we start with financial stress, right, which leads to sometimes the either literally or abstractly leads to, feeling like you don't have basic security. I would say many people live in a state of financial stress. I think many people do. I don't know the number. I mean, we could look and see what kind of research has been done on that. But my guess is most people have some state of financial stress. That would be my guess. And I think that's, what do you do with that? That's a good place to start. What do you do with that? Most people probably live in a state of financial stress, worried about money in some way, in some fashion. And yeah, what do you do with that?
Yeah, money, or some other version of security, some other way to think about not feeling safe in your neighborhood, or not having the resources to get more education or change your career or move to a different place. I think that these are real stresses. And I also think that the psychological framework of assigning responsibility or the cause of one's stress outside of you and feeling like a victim of your situation is stressful too. And just having that mentality is a stressful mentality.
Well, if we go to what actually triggers the stress response, and then we could come back to this financial stress or environmental stress, what actually triggers the stress response? Again, we're not talking about what triggers like a full-blown fight or flight response where you're like fighting for your life or running away. We're not talking about the survival response. We're talking about something, and let's say this is a spectrum in the nervous system, right? Since this is all conceptual, when we talk about fight versus flight, they're concepts to describe systems in the body. So let's say it's a spectrum, and the stress response is sort of like a lower level response in the nervous system, maybe, than a full-blown survival response where you're like, physically fighting or running away or collapsing, or I think that what triggers the stress response is mostly in perception, right? I mean, if there's an actual threat, you're going to go into a survival response system. But so if we tone that down a notch, we say, well, there's a perceived threat that's causing stress, like the things we mentioned earlier. The wars are stressing you. The inflation, right? Like not having as much money as you once had. There's a perception that, and maybe it's true, like things are harder right now. It takes more effort to have the same results, or we're going to lose more soon, right? Like it's hard now, but it's trending to be even harder. These kinds of things are stressful for people, right? That perception. A perception of a loss of control is maybe at the highest level of it all. I can't control any of this. How do I
Would
get
you
back
say
to control?
does it work to just say we perceive more drawbacks than benefits?
I would say that you definitely have to perceive more drawbacks than benefits in a true stress response. Don't think you could be perceiving more benefits than drawbacks. I think that would be a eustress response versus a distress response.
Right.
And I think you're also perceiving a loss of control in some way over your situation.
Well, a loss of control would be more drawbacks than benefits, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that too. I mean, that would be another angle on it, is more drawbacks than benefits, for sure. But I think there's just like a deep feeling of, like, inside one's identity, it would be more like a feeling of being out of control on some level, I think. So I think those have to be there to be stressed on some level.
I think the way it often shows up in my psychology, for me personally, is that if I perceive what's happening as on the way, as opposed to this is in the way, or I'm veering off of the trail into a dead end or a detour or something, then I feel a lot of stress in that perception.
Yeah, for me, stress versus panic. I'm stressed when I perceive this might take me off the path in some way. I might not get what I want, but it's not written in stone yet. That's stress for me. I'm like, not sure. Is this on the way or is this not on the way? So for me, like, stress is that in between. Like, I've lost sight of, like, I'm on the way for sure, but I'm not in a full blown, this is definitely not on the way. Once I cross over to this is definitely not on the way, I'm in like full blown panic mode. Like, my stress is so high that it's more panic level stuff. Mental health disorder level stuff for me would start to surface in that level of, like, there's no way this is on the way. And then I'm panicked. I feel totally out of control. I feel like life is going the wrong way. And that's like almost an existential crisis for me to that degree. Now, I don't think that's everyone. I think, like, some people may be more like you, where it's like, it's not as extreme,
Right. I mean, obviously, we're talking about responses that are out of proportion to the actual stimulus, right? So, I mean, it would be a tall order. I mean, more than a tall order, it would be kind of crazy to, speak with someone in extreme poverty or who's experiencing environmental toxins or, some kind of existential threat like that, and say, well, you just need to see this is in the way or on the way and not in the way, and you'll be good.
Well, you wouldn't say that as the first intervention. Like, if someone's starving, you give them a bowl of food, right? Like, you don't tell them to keep starving but just
feel the
perceive
feelings
it differently.
Just feel the hunger. Yeah.
Well, just be like, just see how this is going to make you a stronger person later. You wouldn't say that. But we're not so much talking about that level of survival right now, because that's a survival response that needs to be resolved. Right. And I think that's good to call out that distinction. We're talking about a level up from true basic survival response. And in the level up, the mind is it's fickle. It's easy to just go into these places where we're like, yeah, life isn't going it's not on the way, right? That's very easy to get in that mindset. And then a stress response is surfacing. An example would be like a period where, I mean, this isn't happening now, where me and my wife were just having a harder time with each other. And it's like a lot more fighting and a lot more, obviously we've been through these periods, a lot more tension between us, a lot more uncertainty of how it's going to resolve.
Right.
That's very stressful, because it's like, where is this going? What's going to happen? How are we going to get through this? Are we going to get through this? I mean, even in the most securely attached relationship, if it's really hard, you're always like, well, but I don't see the other way out of here yet. So it's that's stressful.
Oh, I totally agree. I mean, when my wife and I are in a rupture, it's very stressful. And if we held a more conventional view about long-term partnership, And what I mean by conventional view, like, oh, if we have a conflict, this means our relationship is fucked, or we don't have a good relationship because we're fighting, or some version of that from a conventional standpoint, then my stress level is going to be way higher in the ruptures that I experience. So I guess you could say that the measure of security is your ability to see those experiences as on the way to more strength and more connection, more capacity versus.
Well, in our nervous systems, if we're just talking about relational stress for the moment, like our nervous systems, when we're in a close partnership, right? Like we need to come back together to where the systems are co-regulating. And if we're not there, our nervous systems are stressed because we're not regulated, because there's a signal saying something's off here, and there's kind of some level of danger until we fix it.
Right.
There is a level
Agreed.
of threat that the relationship needs to come back together and repair and resolve, or it could damage the relationship.
Right. Repairs that are not executed or not completed will definitely erode the foundation of your security. No question about that.
So coming back to perception of more drawbacks than benefits, that might be the outcome sometimes of getting through a stress response, is getting back to seeing more benefits than drawbacks, but it's not necessarily always the road to getting out of a stress response. It's one way, but it's not the only way that is going to work to get out of a stress response, is just cognitively try and hack it. Like that's not the only way, obviously. We know that.
Of course. Many different tools that we can get into.
So should we talk about some tools, or are we not there yet?
I don't think we're quite there yet. I mean,
we need to talk about how to even know if you're stressed still.
Yeah.
Are you stressed right now?
I mean, if I feel inside my body, my shoulders are a little raised, a little tight. I think I'm, whenever we're recording a podcast, I'm wanting it to be useful and valuable to people. So I carry a little, it's not severe, but a little bit of stress around that, making sure that this is not a waste of time for folks to be listening.
Yeah, making sure they like you. Do you like it?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Maybe it's in the way for people to not like me.
Yeah. Maybe it's on the way. Maybe you should say something they don't like. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, I enjoy conversations with you and recording the show with you. So, I mean, whatever things that are happening in my body, I do experience as being on the way to a fuller expression of myself. So I'm willing to undergo whatever the biomarkers might show right now in terms of my physiology in order to deliver the goods to people.
Yeah. So you might be in a eustress response.
Yeah.
Maybe you're not distressed.
I think so.
I'm probably not distressed in this moment, but I've been stressed today, actually, parts of the day. I'm not stressed in this moment, but I had this, I told you, this kind of surfacing of this neck pain in the last week and screwing with my sleep. And now I got lower back pain. I'm like, oh, like when I slow down, like, I'm not going to say it's only about stress. I don't think it is, but there's like stress responses going on there. It's like a signal that actually, oh, a part of this is I'm stressed, So yeah, stress is my friend.
You want to say more about that? How you and stress are friends?
I've been friends with Mr. and Mrs. Stress my whole life. Well, again, we all have, but the stress is interesting for me. It's good. It's a good question. Am I stressed? Because the eustress versus distress is a very delicate, like it gets very gray for me, because I can get into pretty high levels of eustress that might be called stress to another person, like a lot of physiological arousal, even tension to some degree. But like I am feeling very generative because it's like I'm being called to action, and it's like a fighter walking into the ring, right? Like you need a very high level of eustress in that moment. You don't want to be in like too much distress walking into the ring, but you definitely need a very high level of agitation in your system to be ready to, produce that much energy through your body.
Agitation, or is it focus, presence, intensity?
Well, I would say intensity. you definitely need focus and all that. But arousal might be a better word than
Yeah.
agitation. You need a very high level of arousal that doesn't fall into distress. So
Uh-huh.
for me, it's slippery. Like I can easily go into distress and like be like Kermit the Frog biting my nails, um, in the corner, like kind of. Actually, I probably do bite my nails, unfortunately. But then I can also often be in more of like the fighter entering the ring, where I'm just like, bring it on. Like, okay, I'm a little stressed here, but I'm ready to attack this thing. I'm ready to do the next thing. I'm ready to whatever it is. It could be about like my family and like, how do we make this better in my marriage or our house better? Or, it could be a project. It could be about a new course we're developing where I'm like, we got to make a new course and people need something new. And so it's just, it's delicate for me. I've obviously suffered from a lot of mental health stuff, so I can easily slip into a distressed state. But I also function at my best, typically in a eustress state. So right now, I would say right now in this moment, I'm more in a eustress state in this moment. And honestly, I probably slipped into a distress state this morning around my back. So it's really good to track these things, I think, like to know yourself well. Because if you don't know if you're in a distressed state, you'll just go and you'll burn out your body.
Right. Well, that brings up for me some of the science or some of the ways to like actually measure what's going on. Like I wonder sometimes about the differences in perception, one person to another, in terms of what's really going on in their physiologic state, bearing in mind that physiology and the ranges that we think of as normal are population averages, right? So someone like Lance Armstrong's not going to have like a normal range of certain things like stress, for example, in his body. It's actually really interesting to study elite guard. It's a whole nother conversation. But for our purposes, like if one person perceives very little stress, but their heart rate variability has dropped in half, or their blood sugar has doubled, or their cortisol levels have tripled in that moment, what does that mean about that person, right? They need to calibrate probably their perception. They're saying that they're a 3 out of 10 on a stress scale, but their physiology, their markers compared to their baseline are double. Then, maybe they need to figure out how to redefine the scale for them.
Yeah. I mean, it also could mean, again, that they're in more of a eustress state. I think we have to, I think you got to kind of go deeper into the markers too, of like, because usually stress leads to depletion, right? Over time. Yeah. Right. So then you go deeper into the markers looking for depletion. Like, is this person's, baseline cortisol levels really low? So now they're depleted. They still spike, but they're low. Right. So I think, but there's no, I don't know. Is there really hard science here to know what the heck's going on? What would you say? Maybe.
Well, the tricky thing is that because everyone's so individual in their responses to stress, that if you really want to know what's going on with you, you need to have baseline levels of biomarkers for you personally.
Right.
That's why I say, like, one of these Tour de France guys whose baseline heart rate is 30 or 35 beats per minute. And, mine at rest is like in the high 40s. It doesn't mean that I have a really high heart rate.
Right.
So most people, it's extremely rare. I can only think of a handful of people who are thought leaders in this area who go to the trouble of getting baseline biomarkers on themselves.
Yeah. That's next level stuff, but it's cool. It's good to do, but it is next level stuff. And you don't have to go to that level in order to succeed in reducing your stress.
Of course.
But you're right. Like if you really want to start to understand from biomarker level, like you need history on yourself. You need to do mood mapping and all kinds of stuff to really understand what these markers translate as.
For sure.
True.
For sure. But I think most people can tell when the experiences that they have under stress have melted away. You can tell the difference in your perception, and you can train your perception to notice these changes.
I think too, going back to our perception is key, which is these fundamental questions you can answer. Is your stress right now on the way?
Yeah.
Are you on the way to solving the thing you're thinking about? Are you engaged in that pursuit? Are you feel fulfilled in that pursuit? Do you want to take on that pursuit? right? I think there is ways to distinguish, at least between eustress and distress. Some people, the next level is I didn't even realize I had anything happening in my body. I didn't feel any physiological response around stress in my body, right? That would be a different thing. And sometimes the markers are really helpful there, actually, right? Seeing like extreme adrenal fatigue or things that like you've been so chronically stretched and you're so depleted that you don't even have that much energy anymore to feel the stress response, even though it's still happening. So that could be helpful.
Totally. And, you know, I think I just want to say that there's also this kind of background ambient level of stimulation in our nervous system that is actually not cyclical. It doesn't, I mean, we might have higher periods of stress, but when we go into lower periods of stress, there's still a tremendous amount of inputs into our nervous system.
Right.
You know, there's a constant parade of at least somewhat disturbing information in social media, in the news, in your phone. It's right there. And I think it's important to acknowledge that our physiology is a cyclical kind of physiology. You know, I mean, everything from the macro of like going through seasons, going through periods of sleep and periods of arousal. But I think that the baseline level of arousal that we're experiencing is inherently challenging for our physiology to maintain, period, you know? And that's where I think it makes sense when people make a decision to, you know, turn off their phone for the week, you know, learn how to meditate or do cold plunges and saunas or, you know, do things that help kind of support this more cyclical phenomenon in our physiology.
I like that a lot. You know, I would say that there's a list of things that might be a signal of distress, right? You know, whether that's headaches or, you know, major gut problems you're having, tension, back tension, right? Like sleep issues.
Yep.
You get sick all the time, very irritable, you're overwhelmed a lot. You know, you could have the opposite with stress, which is like the helplessness feelings.
Right.
Concentration's off, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're having difficulty concentrating. You feel very racy. Your thoughts are racing. You feel racy. Could be resorting to a lot of addiction and stress responses, addictive behaviors.
Sure.
Right. You could be fighting a lot, like conflicts a lot, having trouble staying focused at work. So I think there's like a whole list, and a lot of people might just think these are normal and then be like if you ask them, are you stressed? They're like, not really. But then like you start thinking about it more, you talk about these items, and then it's like, well, this and this is happening. And they're like, oh, I just thought that was normal. You know?
Yeah.
A lot of people, whatever our stress response is, like I can speak for myself, so, you know, like I'll live in pain for 5 years and they'll just be like, oh, I just thought that's normal to be in significant pain, you know?
Right.
And I'll just be like, oh, I just thought that's how it is. Like I didn't, yeah. So I think it's just good, like, to have these kind of items when we're thinking about, like, are you in stress, and kind of going through a list like that and just being like, well, maybe this list is big enough that I am in a stress response and I didn't really know it, or a chronic stress response, we could say. And maybe it's not time to do something different, right?
Absolutely. And, you know, I think about our children too, and, you know, growing up in this ambient level of arousal that's much higher than what our grandparents grew up in. And for example, I remember when my daughter, who's grown up now, but she was one of the guinea pigs with Snapchat when she was 12, when it first came out, and she started sneaking her phone into the bedroom at night and having it in her bed at night. And we were noticing how irritable and dysregulated she seemed during the day. And at first we didn't realize that she was using her phone throughout the night with her friends. And children, I think, also need to be taught, right? They need to be guided and taught about like the rhythms of their nervous system and why getting enough sleep is critical. Yeah. Taking breaks.
Yeah. I mean, I'm going, shoot, is that why I feel the way I do? I've been scrolling YouTube too much. Whoops.
You might want to listen to the doctor over here, take your prescription.
I'd rather stay stressed. But no, it's true. I mean, and you know, if we're talking about teens and stress, it's a great point. I mean, you know, it's hard to recognize stress as an adult, and as a teen, it's even harder. I mean, you're still learning about who you are and how what it's like to be in your body, and what are the signals when something is off or not off, and you're just in a constant learning there in a deep way, and like you don't know, a lot of people don't know, and then you see it in behaviors usually, right? In teens, you'll see that often.
Sure. I mean, the social stress can be very high. It usually is for almost all teenagers.
Yeah.
Do I fit in? What's my identity? Who am I? Do people like me? And so on. It's intense.
Yeah. Yeah. Fortunately, I don't care if people like me that much. So
you've got other issues.
That one, I've got other issues. I'm a loner. So let's talk about how you solve some of this stress, right? Like what do you do about it?
Yeah.
And this is the art. This is an art. It's the art of self-care, really, right?
Yeah.
In modern living, like, self-care over the course of human history becomes a practice and an art form, whereas very early on, it's a part of the natural cycle of life in the day. Like you can't avoid it. It's just like, let's say tens of thousands of years ago, it's just like embedded into the animal body and how we were acting, and then that gets separated over time to now, where with so complex and so much going on, so much information, so much choice, what to do with your time, and that those rhythms are obviously, you have to work at it now. It has to be a practice, or it doesn't happen, right?
Absolutely.
We don't de-stress naturally, like like animals in nature will, like they'll release stress responses much more naturally than us, whether it's through running or playing or shaking, whatever it is, sounds, all that stuff, right? Resting. Now it's practice.
Well, even just on a basic level, like let's just say you got an infection, you're a caveman, you're going to have this cascade of signals in your body that tell you to isolate yourself, right? Or, like you got a scratch from a saber-toothed tiger and it's infected, and, you're back in your cave, like healing. And withdrawn from whatever else you might be doing. Like when we get sick in general, we try to push through it. We try to work. Sometimes kids get to stay home from school when they're sick, but a lot of times, like if you're me, you didn't want to be there, so you would go to school anyway. So anyway, I think these are, like you said, these are signals that they're a little bit faint. Like the signal strength is faint because of the ambient arousal.
Right. That's true.
But nevertheless, the physiologic rig that we're in, except Keys, which is unique.
Except mine.
Why?
Because I have more stress?
You just have a different rig over there. It's sort of like it's become something that can't be automatic anymore. We have to take charge.
Yeah.
Down regulating our arousal.
That's right. It's no easy feat to do it well.
Yeah.
Like you really got to work at it.
Yeah.
You really do. Takes educating oneself. It takes developing new habits and discipline and persistence and constant fine tuning. Like it's a work in progress.
It is. And not doing it makes us much more prone. Living in chronic stress, chronic inflammation makes us more prone to infections, cancer, chronic diseases, diabetes, you name it, Alzheimer's disease. Things that kill people in modern America are more likely when you're stressed.
And if we go sort of thinking back in time, there are three very essential, I think, elements for releasing stress, restoring the nervous system. And that's movement, which we'll call exercise right now. That's food, which we'll say is healthy nutrition, right? And sleep.
Right.
Those three need constant attention, that we're working at those to make. You could do a whole bunch of other stuff, but if those three are off, you're in trouble with stress.
Right.
It's hard to reset the stress response without those three.
Right. And and then you would maybe at the next tier down, you might add, or I don't even know, depends on the person if it's the next tier or not, but relationships that feel mutual and rewarding, beneficial, meaningful work. Without that, I think it's really hard to not feel stressed.
Purpose, meaning,
clean,
relationships.
Exactly.
This is the next trifecta.
Obviously clean water. Some people underestimate the importance of fresh air and sunshine. More and more evidence about underexposure to sunshine. Dermatologists in the audience are probably writing me a negative comment right now in our podcast notes.
Yeah.
But
that's true.
Again, it's cycles. It's like stimulating the backs of your eyes with sunshine.
So these are just like, again, this is just returning to the natural elements and extensions of the body that need to be addressed. And then we get into some sort of, we go out another rung, and then we get into like meditation, where we're actually doing, you could call meditation a science, spiritual technology, spiritual technology, a technology you could call it. Technology to actually interface with our mind and nervous system. And meditation is one of those technologies that is an incredible technology, right? That was cultivated and discovered so long ago. It's not going away anytime soon as a very useful way to regulate a stress response.
I agree. It's one of the most effective and ancient technologies there is. Yeah.
And of course, working with one's breath is a incredible technology that is also very old, doing different types of breathing exercises. Very old technology to breathing patterns, and how you're breathing can change your physiology instantly.
Yeah, instantly.
It's amazing.
Something I have taught a lot of people about in my practice who have anxiety and insomnia, depression, and so on. The cool thing about stress management is that most of the things that are the most effective are readily available without any bells and whistles. Like, you don't need to go buy something.
Right. Yeah, I agree. Pretty amazing. I mean, we have the tools. I mean, you can get fancy, which, I like to do that. I try and do that. But you can't disregard the tools that are free, because if you do, you're still going to be stressed.
Right.
Yeah. And then we get into some more, what we're seeing more now develop in research, more from kind of the biohacking world with like sauna and cold plunge. Cold plunging is very interesting technology in terms of, again, maybe natural a long time ago to have just gotten cold water. I mean, you weren't getting in hot water that often a long time ago, that's for sure. Unless you were by a hot spring, you were in cold water. So again, in some ways, it's an ancient mechanism that we're sort of rediscovering of how that can it's such a great impact on the immune system and the nervous system. It's cool. So biohacking, cold plunge, sauning, hot, cold, hot tubs, all these things are very useful.
The basics, right? Spending high quality time with high quality people that you really feel filled up by those experiences. Having fun, laughter, play, dance, right?
Yeah, it's a good one.
It's easy, when people get very driven or very hyper focused on something, they forget to do fun things. Right. They forget, they might even think having fun or playing or laughing with your children is like not productive. You could think that way.
Yeah. Yeah. No, yeah. I love that time with my kids. It's great. And it's such a stress reliever to laugh with kids.
Yes.
Such a stress reliever. Yeah. That's a good one. I like that one. And then of course, more cognitive. I mean, not just cognitive, but also behavioral, like, managing your time well.
That's big.
Knowing that you're managing your time well, efficiency, values-driven behavior, right? Like making sure there's a lot of behavior throughout the day that feels valuable to you.
It's huge. When you talk about time management, like I think about like time blocking. Like one of the things, I was just doing this morning. I was sitting, I have an infrared sauna. I was sitting in the sauna and I was trying not to look at my phone, and I was checking. Inside of my head, I was thinking, how long can I go without checking my phone in here? Because it would be arguably it'd be a great time to do the things we're talking about. And
how long did you last?
Maybe 8-10 seconds at a time.
10 seconds. That's like when I'm working out at the gym and I'm like, I'm focused and I'm looking down at the phone, and all of a sudden I just tweaked my back because I'm looking at my phone with weight in my hand. Like, yeah, I'm really focused on my phone.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it's work in progress, but I think also this concept of, can we take space from distractions and information so we can get into rest, restore, and recover? And that's not easy to do, but it's simple in concept.
Simple concept.
Not easy, but simple.
Yeah. And necessary, I think. Yeah.
So maybe we wrap up on simple, but not easy.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Get out of stress. Simple, but not easy. All right.
All right. See you next time.
Bye.